Ashton-under-Lyne is rumoured to have several haunted locations. These include a haunted hotel, poltergeist activity in a local bar, and the former market area where a ghost trader is said to linger. Some tales speak of a phantom black knight riding through the town. Tameside Hippodrome, a long-closed theatre in Ashton, is considered one of the borough's most haunted sites. The most famous ghost is Ernie, a shadowy figure wearing a raincoat, who's often seen on the upper balcony before vanishing. Actor Jack Douglas of Carry On fame reported seeing this apparition in 1978. Unexplained footsteps are also frequently heard on the stage, believed to belong to someone who'd previously died there, possibly by hanging. A ghostly violinist has also been reported. The Oddfellows pub in Ashton-under-Lyne has reports from the 2000s of the first two deceased proprietors still being seen years after their deaths. Hartshead Pike in 2006, two women passed a man with a pale, almost grey face wearing clothing from the 1960s or 1970s. So strange was he that the women turned to look back at him, and a few seconds later the figure had vanished. I am suspicious, as people wearing clothing from the 1960s or 1970s is nothing unusual in Ashton. In 1903, on a house on Ellison Street, a miner started to appear in the property, covered in coal dust and carrying a pickaxe. He was thought to be a man killed in a nearby pit whose family had recently moved out of the house. At Knott Hill Reservoir in 2012, a witness spotted a light coming from the ground close to a gate. When they investigated, they saw 4 interlinking windows, through which normal-looking people could be seen moving along a walkway. One of the windows was open, and from which a man's face appeared and said, "You're not supposed to be here, go home." The witness fled, terrified that they'd returned later in the day and found nothing but a pile of dirt. Ashton Moss Rail Junction in 1975, at least 2 signalmen had reported a strange figure walking along the track that vanishes if approached. Old Denton Police Station. 3 separate sightings of a ghostly white figure were reported between 1972 and 1978. The first was spotted by PC Ted Etherington, who was making a cup of tea one night when he saw a figure walk into a disused locker room. He chased after him, but nobody was found. 3 years later, PC Mike Barlow was alone in the station, again at night. Passing an office, he saw the same ghostly figure within. Mike entered the room, but the figure had vanished. Knowing the station was locked, Mike decided to summon up the police dogs to catch the intruder, but again he found no trace. Finally, in 1978, station cleaner Doris Weir was working outside the courtroom early one morning when she saw a white-coated figure peering through the door at the bottom of the staircase leading to the court. She was understandably shaken, and without a trusty baton or pack of police dogs available to her, I'm surprised she didn't leg it straight away. Rycroft Hall is a Grade 2 listed building in Audenshaw. Originally a lavish residence built for a cotton magnate, the hall was converted into a Red Cross military hospital at the end of the First World War, with a cellar used as a mortuary. Ghostly activity is centred around the cellar, but extends throughout the building. Reported phenomena include shadowy figures, sudden temperature drops, moving objects, ringing bells, and disembodied voices. Apparitions include soldiers, a nurse, a young girl in Victorian clothing who's believed to have fallen to her death on the main staircase. Pole Bank Hyde's old cricket ground is said to be haunted by the ghosts of Pole Bank. Apparitions of cricketers dressed in white. A witness reported seeing figures of batsman Bardsley and bowler Bill Radford playing a match before they vanished. A Dove House in Hyde, a once derelict farmhouse pulled down in the mid-1960s, was rumoured to be intensely haunted due to a tragic tale of infidelity and murder. The story involves a farmer who discovered his wife and local squire were lovers. In a rage he killed them, then killed his young son, and finally hanged himself, severing his own head. A poltergeist was reported in a cowshed, anguish whispers in the barn, and a disembodied shade in the house. A Green Lane ghost known as the White Lady is connected to this area. According to an eyewitness, one autumn night at the beginning of the 1970s, my friend and I, when we were in our early teens, were sat around a campfire telling each other, as you do, ghost stories to scare the willies out of each other. When it became my turn, I related a story my gran had told me a number of years ago. At the latter end of the 18th century, a prospering farmer who owned Dove House Farm on the elbow of Green Lane, Godley, decided it was time to marry him. He mysteriously travelled to Manchester one morning and returned in the evening the following day, accompanied by his newlywed bride. The wife was delivered of a boy on whom the farmer doted. Over 10 years must have passed when one fateful day the farmer happened to stumble upon his wife in the arms of the squire in the hayloft in the barn. The wife scornfully told him that they'd been lovers almost from the first day when she arrived at Dove House. The squire scornfully laughed when he said that the boy was his and not the farmer's. In his rage, the farmer attacked the pair with an axe he had been carrying. Mindlessly distraught, he fought the boy, playing in the cowshed, and bashed his head against the wall until dead. Once he'd realised what he had done, in his grief and remorse, he hung himself in the rafters of the farmhouse at the end of the fall of the rope, severed his head off his body. From Godley Green, once below Werner Floor, along the full length of Green Lane to where Dove House once stood, on autumnal nights especially, a white lady walks, looking for her lover. Being courageous lads, all of my friends and I decided to walk the length of Green Lane to encounter the White Lady on the very next night. The next night we valiantly walked up Green Lane from Motteram, New Road End. It was a clear moonlight evening and a fine mist covering the neighbourhood's fields that tumbled onto the lane ahead. A perfect night for ghost hunting. We talked bravely as we strode boldly up the lane. Fearlessly we turned behind Green Lane where Dove House used to be. As if one, we all froze, for we saw standing abruptly out of the mist to the side of the lane a darkened sentinel. It could have been a tree stump or an old gatepost. We did not hang around to investigate. We legged it as fast as we could, back down the lane, and we didn't stop until we reached home, hiding behind a city. Goodley Green is it Goodley or Godley? I think it's Goodley. Is associated with a spectral legend involving an enormous yellow dog, reportedly the size of a bull, that wandered fields belonging to the demolished farm. Residents reported hearing cows mooing loudly in fright and children running home terrified after spotting the huge snarling dog with large black eyes. Another eyewitness from Hyde. A few years ago we had a lovely collie dog, Rosie, who my husband took for walks every day around the woods in Audenshaw. One day my husband looked up for a walk at the top path that runs from Ivy Cottage to Gibraltar Lane. The morning was cold and clear. True to her training, Rosie had picked up her ears and stood at the side at the clip-clop approaching hooves. My husband heard it as the horse approached and stood with the dog, the sound getting louder as the horse came nearer to him. They waited puzzled that no horse or rider came into view. He decided to turn back the way he'd come, and rounding the bend he puzzled to see no sign of anyone, human or equine. In those days, the only path used by riders was the top road. So where did the sound come from? Or was it an echo from the long lost past? The church inn at Huddersfield Road, Stalybridge, is reputedly haunted. Vicky and Gary Chisnell, who took over the historic watering hole in 2013, were more than a little shocked when they were told of eerie goings-on, which included lights switching themselves off and on, sub-zero temperature drops and sightings of spooky beings. Friend Christine Bradbury said, "We went into room 2 and the bed hadn't been slept in, was soaked through. The room was freezing. It was a strange feeling." A young man believed to have been the landlord's son, who had his head blown off during a pigeon shoot in a nearby field in 1898, is thought to be one of the supernatural residents. But bar staff also claim to have seen 2 children sitting on the pub stairs. The days of Staley Vegas may now be a distant memory, as is the ghost of a young man at the station buffet. Please remind him that however much he loves the buffet, he now has a lovely family in Indonesia, eagerly awaiting his return. Kacang hijau may never taste like black peas and bintang like millstone bitter, but assure him that he has moved on. Long ago it was a hanging offence to trespass on lands of the aristocracy or be caught poaching. In desperate times, villagers would steal crops from local farmland to feed their starving family. People would meet in a dell below Hobson Moor, the Hangsman Noose in Gallows Clough. The decomposing bodies of poachers, highwaymen, vagabonds and footpads would have been left to rot and their bones picked clean by crows, hanging from the gibbet or gallows field all over the area, like a top of Werneth Low, once known as Hanging Bank. Many a traveller who happened upon the hangman's gallows tree would quickly spur on his horse or hasten his cart past the clattering skeletons. Cottages close to Gallows Clough would be bolted up tight on certain bewitching nights, as residents feared that the witches regularly held their covens gathered around the hanging skeletal corpses, conducting their diabolical ceremonies. One dismal, dank and drizzly night, trudging along the muddy lane towards the clough, there came a solemn procession. To his front strode a parochial hangman of Motteram and the village of Staley, the local magistrate riding a horse behind, who was the feudal lord of Longendale stewards, came to bear witness to the hanging of a poacher, whom he, the steward, had brought to justice, and whose duty it was to see the proper administration of the punishment was lawfully carried out. Accompanying him was the parish minister, who would give the ministrations of the last rites at the foot of the gallows to the condemned before he fell hung to his death. Behind them, in shackles with the hangman's noose around his neck, was the day's gibbet fodder, escorted by armed local sheriffs and watchmen. He had been accused and found guilty of poaching from the forest in Longendale that was owned by Lord Longendale. To the rear of the train were those who had come to grieve the man. A woman stepped up to the man on horseback and said, "Mercy, mercy, Master Steward. Thou canst save him yet, and it's such a little crime. What, it's only one deer from the forest against the life of a good man. He but shot the deer because I, his wife, and his child needed food. And thou sparest his life. We will work and more than doubly make up for the loss of his lordship." The steward, a dark man of evil countenance, looked at the girl for a moment and hesitated, then caught the eye of the prisoner, and instantly his face grew stern. "Get thee gone, thou baggage," said he, spurning the female. "Stop her mouth, some of you, or it will scream. Take her to the ducking stool." Then turning to the hangman, he curtly said, "Do your work." Before the steward's men could lay a hand on her to escort her away, the wife of the villain, to be hung, without merciful reprieve, sped off up the path that came to the top of Arap Edge, from where she watched the proceedings, wringing her hand and giving out the occasional pitiful wails. After all the crowd had gone, the wife came down to the hanging man and began her funeral vigil with many a woeful ululation. None came to give her comfort, all except one, an old hag who lived in a hovel in an isolated dell up towards the top of Hobson's Moor, and shunned by all who ever came across her, as they thought her a witch, approached the forlorn wife. The old hag softly asked why the wife, now widow, took on so. She told her tale of woe, how in the last year after the birth of the young, newly married couple, first child, a boy, then had fallen into hard times. No work could be had for her husband, and the whole family clemmed. The husband, in seeing how it fared with his wife and baby boy, in his desperation left the cottage and went to poach some game to feed them. No sooner had he left than the child gave one last colic gasp, whelp, and died. And now her beloved husband had been hung for want of trying to feed his wife an unburied child. The childless widow clenched her fist to the heaven and cursed that she would have her revenge. The old hag helped the widow to her hovel, where the two remained, equally shunned by all, and the widow donned much of the same ragtag garb as the hag wore, and both became indistinguishable from one another, and both were known as the witches of Gallows Clough. A few months passed, and the steward's wife delivered him a son, on whom he doted. But the child was not much older than the widow's deceased child had been. He was abducted one night, and many feared by some wild animal had taken into the woods. The next morning the mutilated body of the child was found, and the bereaved parents buried their child the next day. Some 20 years passed when the young poacher was brought in front of the court's bench where the steward resided, and he was not too dissimilar to the similar criminal case he'd officiated nearly a quarter of a century previous. The steward noted that one of the old hags of Gallows Clough stood close by, whom he surmised that she was the mother of the man who had been caught poaching his lordship's woodlands. For it was a common gossip that the rumour that the younger hag that now stood in front of the steward had a son, father unknown. He refused to give to the hag succour nor mercy to the condemned son, just as he had once done before, and would sentence him to be hanged in Gallows Clough until dead the very next day. The steward was all dismal when the hag, from that point on, made no further utterances. She remained silent, to the utter distemper of the steward, as they dragged the hag's son to the gallows. He was almost dumbfounded by the hag's deafening silence as her son was hung. He said to the hag in alarm, "Why did you not cry out for mercy for her son?" "My son? Fool! Nay, 'tis thy son, steward. The child who disappeared from his nurse's room was brought to me, was reared by me, was trained for the gallows, and hangs their death. My son died the same day his father was hanged, murdered by thee, and mangled and disfigured body was found by thy servants, and buried as thy son. Dost thou understand me now?" The steward reeled, but recovered himself with an effort. With a wild cry, the steward stripped the clothing from the dangling horse, and there upon the lifeless shoulder was found the mark which branded the criminal as his child. He'd hanged his own son. Before his men could lend a hand to stay him, he'd fallen senseless to the ground. For it was the widow of the poacher he had hung so many years before, who stood above him, cackling her hideous laugh of vengeance, as the steward's long-lost son strangled by his own hands. While the JP's men went to attend to their fallen master, who appeared to have suffered a deliberate stroke from which she never recovered. The widow disappeared up Hobson's Moor, never seen again. Her revenge complete.